Hey, good day to you. This is Todd. I am a regular dude walking in the Word. Hey, as we're going through Leviticus here, the first part of the book is dealing with offerings, okay? And these were sacrifices given at the altar. When we were going through Exodus, I had up on the wall behind me, I had diagrams of the tabernacle. And you could go back to that and look and see where these would have taken place in the tabernacle. The altars that would have taken place. Yesterday we talked about the burnt offering, and that was a consecration of ourselves. With that, that's what the purpose of that was, to consecrate yourself. Today we're talking about the grain offering, and that's for consecration of service. So when you were wanted to go into service for God, this is the offering that would be used for that, and it's the grain offering, not done on the same altar as the other ones, but it was a different altar, and altogether different. But again, what I'm doing here is showing you how these things point to Jesus. And when you just read through it, let's say you're reading the Bible in a year, you just read through it and you don't pick those things up. But we're taking our time to go through this so that you can see how the book of Leviticus, it was, we talked about it, it's an owner's manual, or it's a manual on how to live in the Old Testament there, but it's also pointing to Jesus, okay? So anyway, let's read, this is chapter 2 of Leviticus. We're going to read chapter 2, and it's dealing with the grain offering, okay? So let me get my glasses on here. When anyone brings a grain offering to the Lord, their offering is to be of the finest flour. All right, so this was flour that you would use, and it was the finest flour. You'd sift it and grind it and so forth. Just like Jesus was, in our lives also, when we're going into service, we go through trials and we're sifted and ground, it feels like sometimes. But that's, to get us ready for the ultimate sacrifice here. And Jesus, the same thing happened to him. When he went out, he was called to go into the wilderness for 40 days. That's part of that whole sifting and making fine that flour. Okay? So they are to pour olive oil on it and put incense on it. And Aaron and it is to Aaron's sons, the priests. The priest shall take a handful of the flour and oil together with all the incense and burn this as a memorial portion on the altar, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. The rest of the grain offering belongs to Aaron and his sons. It is the most holy part of the food offering presented to the Lord. So you burn some of this on the altar, but then and it had a pleasant aroma, okay? Like when you're baking bread, it's a pleasant aroma. Same type of thing here. But then also the priests were to take some of this too. So it was a way that they would be compensated. God was taking care of the priests through this particular offering. One of the ways they took care of it. But I want you to notice when they put this together, it says poured olive oil on it. All right. Olive oil is representative of the Holy Spirit. Okay, so Jesus did his ministry with the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit came down upon him. The Holy Spirit came down upon Mary, and that's how we had Jesus. And then as Jesus was baptized, the Holy Spirit descended on him. And in the same way, anything we do in ministry, we better have the Holy Spirit involved with that. So to have that grain offering mixed in and have that oil in the same way, we're going into service and we're serving God, but we better have the Holy Spirit involved with that too. Okay, so that's a big thing to note here today. Verse 4: If you bring a grain offering baked in an oven, it is to consist of the finest flour, either thick loaves made without yeast, and with olive oil mixed with, or thin loaves made without yeast, and brushed with olive oil. If a grain offering is to be prepared in a griddle or on a griddle, it is to be made of the finest flour mixed with oil and without yeast. Crumble it and pour oil on it, it is a grain offering. If the grain offering is to be cooked in a pan, it is to be made of the finest flour and some olive oil. Bring the grain offering made of these things to the Lord. Present it to the priest, who shall take it to the altar. He shall take out the memorial portion from the grain offering and burn it on the altar as a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. The rest of the grain offering belongs to Aaron and his sons. It is the most holy part of the food offering and is presented to the Lord. Okay? So look at this. He tells you when he's writing here, there's 3 different ways you can make this offering. You can do it in an oven, you can do it on a griddle, and you can do it in a pan. So 3 different ways. It's like not everyone had an oven, okay? But you might have the griddle, and then the griddle's a larger thing. A lot of times we say the griddle to make pancakes on. Well, you might not have that, but you at least have a pan to cook something. So in the same way we talked about yesterday about the other offering, the burnt offering, the different animals that would be used as to what you can afford. Again, here, this offering, in whatever way you can cook it, is acceptable. Okay, so again, we're all accessible to Jesus, and again, this offering is accessible to anyone. So something to note there. Verse 11: Every grain offering you bring to the Lord must be made without yeast. Okay, not made without yeast. Yeast represents sin. Okay, so don't be mixing sin in with what your ministry is. How many times do people do this crazy stuff? Like, oh yeah, we're trying to build up this church, and we'll do it with a little theft and deceit and so forth. Like, what kind of goofiness is that? But that's what people do. And so you're mixing in the yeast in with that sin in with your ministry. Not good. It's not going to work out. God's not pleased with that. All right. So he's saying there, when you bring that offering, don't be putting any yeast in it. Okay. Yeast is significant. It represents sin. All right. So don't have that in there. For you are not to burn any yeast or honey in the food offered presented to the Lord. Okay. Whoa. No honey either. Okay. Honey is also a thing, something somewhat of decomposition. But honey, if you heat honey up, it will break down. Okay. And so when you get into trials in your ministry, and if it's honey, well, it's going to break down. It's not going to hold up. Okay. And so in the same way, he's saying, don't be putting honey on here because that can't stand the heat, if you know what I mean. All right. All right. You may bring them to the Lord as an offering of the first fruits, but they are not to be offered on the altar as a pleasing aroma. Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of the grain offerings. Add salt to all your offerings. Okay, so you weren't supposed to have the yeast. You weren't supposed to have honey, but you were supposed to have salt. Okay, the yeast it represents sin. The honey represents not standing up under the heat in decomposition. But the salt is a preservative, okay? So that's what that represents. Verse 14, if you bring a grain offering of the first fruits to the Lord, offer crushed heads of new grain roasted in the fire. Put oil and incense on it. It is a grain offering. The priest shall burn the memorial portion of the crushed grain and the oil together with all the incense as a food offered presented to the Lord. Okay, good. So that concludes chapter 2. Some key things here, though, in this thing. Again, it's accessible to all. However you could make this grain offering, it's like bread, okay? However you could make it was acceptable. If you had an oven, if you had a griddle, and if you had a pot, you could make it either way. Okay, any of those ways. And then also, don't be putting yeast in it. No, don't mix sin in with your offering. All right, and don't put honey in with it too. It can't stand the heat. It'll break down with the heat. So don't be putting honey in it. But you're to put salt in it. Salt is a preservative, and that was supposed to be a part of that too. And Jesus uses salt in several illustrations in the parables in the New Testament. So I'll end with that. There's so much good stuff in this chapter and in this book to show you how the book of Leviticus, it points to Jesus. All right. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm just a regular dude walking in the Word, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow as we continue our journey through Leviticus. Lord's blessing. I'll see you then.